If you know what that device is, if you recognize the sound of that Velcro rip and your heart starts to pound the minute you hear that familiar hum, we need to talk. Odds are you bought that device to feel safer and healthier. But think about your life right now. Are you safer and healthier, or are you just a slave to a rubber tube and a plastic screen? Today, I'm going to show you how responsible health tracking turns into a psychological nightmare in the form of a fixation and an obsessive fear. We're going to talk about how an anxiety therapist, that's me, might help you stop checking your blood pressure and start living your life. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Anxious Truth. Today, this is episode 342 of the podcast. We're recording April of 2026, and we are going to talk about fear of, obsession with, fixation on blood pressure. This is a very common situation, a very common struggle that many anxious people in my therapy practice, people in my social media community find themselves in. And it often happens in the absence of an actual blood pressure issue. There's no high blood pressure, no hypertension, no cardiac issues, no medical issues at all. Yet you may wind up absolutely fixated, obsessed with, and terrified of your blood pressure, which can drive you into continuous checking and worry loops that you can't seem to stop or control, or it can drive you into extreme avoidance loops that ruin your life or have a very negative impact on your life, and you can't seem to control those otherwise. We are going to talk about that today. We're actually going to pretend that if you came and saw me and worked with me as your therapist, which you don't because this is YouTube or a podcast, and I am a therapist, but not your therapist, so keep that in mind. This can only be sort of a 50,000 foot view. We're going to pretend that you come and work with me, and we're going to talk about how we might work together using third wave acceptance and mindfulness approaches to help you overcome that fixation and that fear connected to your blood pressure. Before we get into that, just a quick reminder that The Anxious Truth is more than just this YouTube video or this podcast episode. There are way more resources on my website at theanxioustruth.com, so check those out. I would definitely point you over to the Disordered podcast, which is a podcast that I do every Friday with my friend Josh Fletcher. He's also an anxiety therapist that practices in the UK. You can find that at disordered.fm. When you're over at disordered.fm, you can check out the Disordered community space, because if you'd like to talk about this episode of The Anxious Truth or any episode of The Anxious Truth or something you see me post on social media, the Disordered community space is where I'm sort of hanging out. Not required. We're not promising that we're going to cure you or fix you. It's not therapy. It's not magic. It's not a cult. But if you'd like a little extra support from people who understand your struggle, your peers in this process, and like to interact with me and Josh, that's where I'm hanging out. So check it out if you think it might be worth it for you. Let's talk about what happens when good sort of health habits, or what look like good health habits, healthy checking, watching health metrics, and we know that blood pressure is definitely one of them. It's part of what fuels the problem here, goes from a good habit or proactive attention on your health that works for you into sort of a psychological trap or a psychological nightmare. That happens pretty often. So you wind up buying, say, a blood pressure monitor, or you start to look at how can I impact my blood pressure as one particular health marker using diet or exercise or lifestyle changes or supplements or whatever you think is right for you. And you start to think like, yeah, I'm doing something really good for me. But then you really notice that, well, I'm really fixated on my blood pressure. I'm terrified of it. What if it is high? Maybe you have white coat syndrome, which is very, very, very common, meaning that when you go to a doctor, you're nervous to be at the doctor and your blood pressure is high when they first check it. Or maybe you did have a high blood pressure reading at one point, or maybe you suffer from panic disorder or agoraphobia and you ran to the emergency room or the A&E in the UK because you were panicking one day and they took your blood pressure and sure enough, it was really high. But that's supposed to happen when we're really anxious. Remember, blood pressure is very dynamic and will change all the time. So there's a million different reasons why monitoring or checking or paying attention to blood pressure, trying to monitor or manage blood pressure, which could be a reasonable part of overall health and wellness that anybody should probably take part in, can really turn left and turn into a unhealthy obsession and fixation that becomes driven by worry loops, checking loops, and other compulsions and avoidances. So why does this happen? I mean, in the end, we all care about our health, and that's okay. It is sort of one of those universal experiences that we all share as human beings. If you're going to be alive on planet Earth as a human being, you're probably going to be concerned with or think about your health. You're going to want to stay healthy if you can. That is an almost universal human experience. So it's sort of easy to start off that way. But then once you start to notice that something doesn't feel right or about your blood pressure, or maybe you saw a number that didn't look right to you or triggered a real fear in you, or you start to worry even without a high number that like, what if I do have high blood pressure? Or you start to worry like, oh, it runs in my family. And what if it happens to me? And they call it the silent killer. And you start to think about strokes and heart attacks and kidney failure and all the things that we're told can come along with blood pressure. Maybe you start to wonder about the way you treat your body because you don't really exercise, or you're maybe not eating or drinking in the most healthy way. And anything like that can take that normal health concern that all humans find themselves experiencing sometimes, can really amp it up. And then you can begin to start to worry all the time about your blood pressure and get fixated on it and obsessed with it. And it becomes way, way, way more important than it would be for any person who's just sort of non-anxiously concerned with and trying to monitor and protect their health. And that happens, you wind up in a situation where the paradox of worry and stress come into play. Because in the world of blood pressure, as any cardiologist or any medical profession will tell you, when you are stressed and when you are worried, your blood pressure will in fact go up. So when concern about blood pressure, which is normal for pretty much any human being, starts to become a fixation that drives a bunch of compulsion or worry or checking or avoidance, then we have increased stress around that. And when we have an increased stress level, sure enough, the thing that we fear so much tends to happen. But that's normal. Your blood pressure is dynamic, and when you are stressed, it will tend to go up. So anybody who has ever resorted to checking their blood pressure over and over and over, either every day or many times a day, and if you're watching or listening today, you may be checking many times a day, knows that if you go into that terrified of what the reading is going to be, there's a really good chance you're going to get a reading that you don't want or don't like. So how do we address this? Because many people in the audience surrounding this podcast or my therapy practice will start to get really confused because they will say, well, blood pressure is important. I'm supposed to care about my blood pressure, except I can't seem to unglue myself from it. And it's taking over my life and it's changing the way I live my life. And I'm scared and worried all the time. And whenever I have to interface with any sort of medical care, and I know they're going to take those vital signs, I begin to freak out weeks ahead of time. And then I go in there and I get a high reading, and then they look at me sideways, and the whole thing is a big old mess. How would we approach that? Well, if you were to, let's say, hypothetical situation, and again, remember, I am not your therapist, I'm just a therapist. If you showed up in my therapy office and said, this is my problem right now, how would we approach that? Well, we would look through a couple of different lenses. I tend to look through the ACT lens, the acceptance and commitment therapy lens. I tend to look through an MCT lens, which is metacognitive therapy. Then if we're going to look through those lenses, we're going to look at a couple of different things. So let's look at the ACT stuff first. First, we're going to really look at acceptance of reality. Again, I said before, all human beings are going to encounter health concerns. All human beings may encounter health challenges, one of which may be blood pressure. It is in fact true that blood pressure is a reasonably important health marker that we all should probably care about. So that is the reality of the circumstance. You are not broken, or you are not defective, or you're not defined by the fact that you are worried about your blood pressure or fixated more than the average person. You're just having a hard time accepting the fact that, yeah, this is a really important thing to most people, except the way you are approaching it has nothing to do with actually addressing it in a healthy fashion. So the A in ACT tells us that struggle, concern, worry, fear, challenge is part of every human life, and sometimes it is centered on health and blood pressure. We have to accept that, and we have to understand that there's only so much that we could do about that. And here's a hint: checking your blood pressure compulsively 8 times a day, worrying about it constantly ruminating on it, researching all the time, being very, very, very overly strict with your diet, or refusing to see medical professionals is not the way to address that universal health concern that most human beings are going to encounter. The other thing that we're going to look at through the ACT lens is we're going to start to challenge the belief that blood pressure is an exception to the acceptance rules. Since blood pressure is in fact an important health marker, we know about it, we all hear about it all the time. An anxious person will often want to carve out an exception, and they will say to somebody like me, hey, Mr. Therapist, hey, Drew, hey, podcaster, hey, guy on YouTube, I know that you say that I'm supposed to accept my anxiety. I know I'm supposed to treat my scary thoughts as just mental events, but surely those rules can't apply here, can they? I'm supposed to put all of my energy and take all of my action and point it toward my blood pressure, right? No, we really shouldn't do that, because again, we have to accept the reality that we often encounter things that are triggering to us or uncomfortable to us, one of which is the concept of failing health or health problems or even mortality. And that's just part of being alive. Now, I'm not saying that you should bury yourself in sodium every day, never exercise, and be resigned to die at 32 years old. That's not the point at all. The point is that we have to recognize that we cannot solve mortality. We cannot guarantee that we will never have a health problem. And we are all going to be concerned about our health from time to time. That doesn't mean that the strategy that you've been using is a good idea. So we're going to accept the commonality and universality of the concern. We're going to have to look at the fact that we're coming up against some very uncomfortable truths that are also just part of every human life. And we're going to have to really compassionately start to question the strategies that we're using to address those things that make us uncomfortable. So as you can see, it really doesn't have anything to do with blood pressure in that situation. This has to do with, ooh, I've got caught on what I think is a very important thing, and I start to approach it in a completely useless way. But I'm going to say that, no, it's right that I approach it in this useless way and kind of disrupt the whole rest of my life. And remember, in ACT, we're trying to learn to back away from the maladaptive or the damaging or the restrictive responses, like checking your blood pressure 68 times a day or refusing to see a doctor no matter how sick you are. And we're going to start to try to put our energy into committed action toward the things that actually matter in life. So when we look through the ACT lens, we're always trying to say, well, this is uncomfortable, but it's sort of part of life. And I can't always push against and resist things that I find uncomfortable, because often there's no point. What can I do instead? Well, I could try to live a life that more accurately represents the life that I sort of want and reflects my values. So that's how we would approach this through the ACT lens. Again, I'm giving you like a 50,000 foot view here. That's what it might look like if you bring your blood pressure, fixation, and obsession to an anxiety specialist like me. We're also going to look through the MCT lens. That's metacognitive therapy. And in metacognitive therapy, we're going to start to look at your meta beliefs. So there are positive and negative meta beliefs. You probably carry the belief that thinking about, worrying about, and ruminating actively about your blood pressure is actually helpful. Blood pressure is really important, so I'm supposed to do that. It helps me. It is preparation, it is safety, it is planning, and it is certainty producing, so I'm supposed to do that. I am supposed to think about, worry about, and actively worry about my blood pressure all the time. That's a positive meta belief. And then on the flip side, we're going to look at the negative meta beliefs, which is, yeah, worry and rumination and fixation and just putting all of my energy into the idea that blood pressure needs to be managed and I need to be saved from that. That seems like a good idea. But on the negative side, I feel like I cannot control this. The worry is freaking me out. It's stressing me out. And therefore it is probably going to harm me in the very way that I'm trying to avoid being harmed. So we would really look at that, because those are two opposing beliefs that tend to exist at the same time. I think the worry is correct. I think worry and rumination is correct. I think fixation is correct because this is such an important thing, but also I can't seem to control the worry, the rumination, and the fixation, and it's probably damaging me. So we would really want to look at that. When we look through the MCT lens, we start to really want to understand that thoughts about blood pressure, while blood pressure may be an important thing, are in fact just mental events. I often do a blue tiger exercise with my therapy clients. And those of you who are in the disordered community space recognize that we do blue tiger quite a bit. The blue tiger exercise just basically asks you to think about a blue tiger. Go ahead, do it now. Can you get an image of a blue tiger in your head? Can you make that blue tiger make noise or do tricks? Can you walk around the blue tiger and imagine what that blue tiger might look like from all the different angles? Cool. Now I might ask you to see if there's an actual blue tiger in the room with you. And the answer would be no, I'm pretty sure there's not. So if that is the case, yet you had this very vivid experience of a blue tiger using your mind, we would ask you, what is that? Well, that's a mental event that happens in your head. And while a blue tiger may hold no special significance to you, and you might think, oh, well, that's kind of a cool little exercise, Drew. Thanks for doing that. But blood pressure is really important. We would have to come to the agreement that thoughts about blood pressure are, in fact, mental events, just like thoughts about a blue tiger. And once we can come to that agreement and start to experiment with that, we would begin to take a detached mindfulness approach to thoughts about your blood pressure. I recognize that I am having thoughts about my blood pressure right now. It feels really compelling. It makes me want to do something. It is making me very agitated and activated. So through the MCT lens, we would start to learn to recognize when we have been triggered and activated. I'm anxious, I'm agitated. My blood pressure feels like an urgent issue right now. I feel physical sensations of fear and anxiety and apprehension, and I'm having a lot of thoughts about my blood pressure. I'm experiencing fear and worry. That makes me want to fill in the blanks, actively worry, ruminate, Google, ask ChatGPT, check my blood pressure, not check my blood pressure, calculate how much sodium I've had today, ask again about the family history of stroke or heart attack. You have to start to learn to recognize I am being activated by this. It is catching my attention and trying to hook me in, and it makes me want to do these certain things or not do certain things. When we can recognize, oh, this is all because I'm having thoughts about blood pressure, scary thoughts about, yes, an important thing, but is it really helping me to worry or ruminate? Is it actually protecting me? Well, we would have assailed those positive meta beliefs, and we would help you understand that the negative meta beliefs are also not necessarily correct. So by forming a new relationship with those thoughts, recognizing when they're activating us and choosing to act in a different way rather than being dragged by them, we are combining principles of ACT and MCT, not to guarantee a particular reading on the blood pressure machine, but to change your relationship with the idea of your blood pressure and what those numbers even are. Somebody who begins to overcome that obsession and that fixation with blood pressure doesn't arrive at a perfect blood pressure. They don't know or feel assured or be guaranteed or 100% certain that their blood pressure is always going to be excellent and they're never going to have a health problem. That person just learns to, interact with the idea of blood pressure and interact with blood pressure readings, whether they be at home or at the doctor's office, in a very different way. Yeah, sometimes my blood pressure will be higher. Sometimes it will be lower. Sometimes my blood pressure will be sort of high all the time because maybe I will develop a blood pressure problem. But if that were to actually happen, I would have to deal with that in a different way. Maybe I would have to make lifestyle changes. Maybe I'd have to go on some medication. Don't know, but I do know that fixation, obsession, compulsion, and constant checking, worry, and avoidance is not an actual way to interact with the concept of my blood pressure, no matter how much it's important to me, and no matter how much I want to be healthy. So those are sort of the ways we would work on that through the ACT and MCT lenses if you came to see somebody like me. Now, other therapists may take different approaches, but therapists who are specifically trained in and specializing in anxiety disorders would probably take approaches that look a lot like this. There may actually be exposure components in the treatment. We may be exposed to sitting with your blood pressure machine next to you, or just wearing the cuff without turning it on, or watching videos of people having their blood pressure checked, or reading stories about high blood pressure and things of that nature. We might use those things if we need to, or we might not. This is where the 50,000-foot view that you get in a podcast episode or a YouTube video can really only go so far, and we'd have to really individualize it if we were actually working together, and any therapist that you work with would have to do that as well. So keep that in mind. One thing that I definitely want to recognize, though, is that anytime you begin to change your relationship with a concept like blood pressure and thoughts about your blood pressure, and you begin to back away from those compulsions, from the active worry and rumination, the checking loops, the avoidance loops, and start to move in directions that more accurately reflect your values and what you can productively and happily interact with your life, you often will experience a bit of rebound anxiety. Now, we talk about that when we say it feels like you're doing something reckless. So if you are obsessed with the idea of your blood pressure today, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you've already checked it 6 times, and you're probably going to check it another 8 before you go to bed. If you did not check those other 8 times and you drop that on the floor today, well, that might be progress, but you will likely feel like you are making a horrible mistake. That's normal. It's normal for a couple of reasons. You know, those behaviors become ingrained. They seem like they make sense. They seem like they are saving you. And after you engage in worry, rumination, or some sort of behavioral compulsion or avoidance, your fear about your blood pressure drops. And then you think you did something good. So when you stop doing those things that feel, air quotes, good, you will think that you're putting yourself at risk. So there's a paradox there. You have to learn over time that, like, oh, my fear about my blood pressure, my worry, my fixation will drop no matter what I do, whether I check it 68 times, check my sodium level compulsively, or do nothing. My concern about blood pressure cannot sustain itself unless I sustain it by engaging in those responses. So you have to learn that. But initially it will feel like you're making a huge mistake. You're breaking those habits that feel like they are safety and reassurance and certainty seeking habits. And so a certain amount of rebound anxiety, or maybe feeling a little bit worse, would be expected. So keep that in mind. It is not wrong if you begin to work on changing those habits. Oh, I'm being triggered about my blood pressure. Should I follow that this time? Nah, I'm not going to follow it. Let me experiment with just going back to playing with my kids for the next hour while my brain is telling me that I'm definitely going to have a stroke today. And we know that there's no actually underlying medical concern. Keep that in mind. That's underneath this entire episode, of course. Well, that will feel really risky, but that's how you learn that, like, fixating was never actually a problem to begin with, and I never really had to do that. So keep that in mind. We are looking for a shift from I am my blood pressure, like this data point on this silly little screen, whether the doctor takes my blood pressure or I take my blood pressure, does not define me and does not predict my entire future, or my 5-minute future, or my 50-year future. I am a person that is more than that. Blood pressure is just one part of me, one part of my physicality, one part of my life, and one thing that I may think about from time to time and sometimes have to interact with, but not always. The goal is not to guarantee that you have your blood pressure perfectly under control, that you will never get a high reading, and that you will live forever. The goal is to recognize that there's only so much you could do about that. And if there is something that you really did have to do medically, I assure you, worrying, ruminating, and compulsively checking would not be it. And finally, I would urge you to remember that the goal of therapy, whether it is about your blood pressure, about any other anxiety disorder, about something else that you're fixated or have fear about, isn't to reach perfection. It is not to find a perfectly calm, happy life where you're just zenned out and happy and thrilled and nirvanic all the time with no concerns because you've got it all under control. That's not it at all. The goal of therapy, at least the way I see it, is to help you learn more adaptive ways to respond when life challenges you. Sometimes our health in the form of blood pressure does challenge us. How can we learn to respond in a way that lets us live the best life that we could possibly live? Even if there were to be some problem, how do I know how to respond to it in the best possible way? That is what therapy does. That's what an anxiety therapist would help you learn if you came to them with a blood pressure, fear, fixation, or obsession. So that is episode 342 of The Anxious Truth. That's enough on blood pressure and fixation for now. Again, if you want to ask questions about what you heard today or interact with other people who share this experience, because there are many of them, you can check out the Disordered Community Act, that app. That's where Josh and I are hanging out. That's where I'm more likely to be able to answer questions and engage a little bit more. But again, hopefully you can take something out of this. If this piqued your interest in some way, shape, or form, I mean, I guess if you're in New York State, you could possibly work with me. But as of April of 2026, my practice is full. I have a very long waiting list, so I couldn't offer you a spot now anyway. But if you'd like to reach out for professional help, you may use some of the concepts that you heard in this episode to help you guide you in that search for an in-person helper. And of course, if you're going to do it on your own, which many people do, and many people can do successfully, just remember, a thought about blood pressure is not the same as a stroke. Even though blood pressure sounds really important and really scary, worry, rumination, fixation, compulsion, and constant worry and checking is not an actual strategy that means a hill of beans in the real world. It just temporarily makes you feel better. So working on recognizing the drive to feel better, but knowing that feeling better and being safer aren't always equal, can help inform changes in the way you respond to those triggering thoughts and that sense of urgency about your blood pressure. So if you could take any step today in a slightly different direction and interact with your blood pressure and the concept of blood pressure in a slightly different way than you've been stuck doing for any length of time, you are winning. All those changes add up. Try to learn the lessons in every change that you make. You can get there. If I didn't think you can get there, I wouldn't be making these silly YouTube videos or podcast episodes. So I will be back in another 2 weeks with another episode of The Anxious Truth. Not sure what we're going to talk about, but I'll be here anyway. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. If you like the video, hit the like button, maybe subscribe to my YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so that you know when I upload new videos, because that tells YouTube that you like when I do this and they don't just bury me in the algorithm in favor of really silly stuff that doesn't help anybody with their mental health. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate your time and attention. I hope I've been helpful. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Disordered comes out every Friday. Check it out at disordered.fm. We're out. See you later.